I don't think America has ever stopped being great. What we need to do now is make America whole. Working together, rejecting the mean-spiritedness, the hateful rhetoric, the insults. That's not who we are.
Time to spin the big polling prize wheel once again. Super Tuesday is about to descend, and if we are to believe in the numbers without question, Trump and Clinton win. Rubio struggles for second to stay relevant. Cruz will take Texas and falter everywhere else. Bernie Sanders should get down to the business of planning his summer at the Cape. And you can drop all the Klan references you want in the Bix, but it won't make any difference whatsoever to Donald Trump. All right, here comes the guy who can put some truth behind all these numbers. Brian Graham is managing partner at Dixie Strategies, a marketing and PR firm based in St. Augustine, Florida. Brian, thanks for joining us. And seeing as we led off with Hillary Clinton, let's go ahead and stay on the left here, because your latest poll from KTVT, CBS Channel 11 in Texas, showed that Hillary Clinton maintains her lead over Senator Sanders. Lead has shrunk a bit, but wait a minute, she had this massive win in South Carolina. There were those people figuring that would follow right into Texas, and she'd have a really good run.
Well, Hillary Clinton is looking very strong. There is no doubt about that. I think the Clintons have always depended upon the South to be their firewall, so to speak. And as of right now, it appears that strategy is working. What
about all this she can't be trusted thinking process? When you do the poll, is there any bump? Is there any change whatsoever? People talking about her electability and her trustworthiness?
As of right now, it doesn't seem that is affecting her at all in the Democratic primary. As we saw in South Carolina, she did very well. She does extremely well when you consider her support among African American and Latino voters.
All right, let's go ahead then and look at the right. Ted Cruz increasing his lead over Donald Trump. Now, explain to me why. I get it that he's from Texas, but a lot of the people that we've spoken to, media types in Texas, say that he's not necessarily a drop-dead choice in Texas among a lot of people, which kind of led us to believe that maybe the numbers wouldn't be this big. When you're talking to the people and getting some of these numbers back, why are they saying that, regardless of what other people, how they may think, Ted Cruz is the guy?
Well, when we do polls, we are polling likely primary voters. The part that we cannot account for is voters who normally never show up for a primary, who might show up this time due to Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's goal is to look at that 9.5 points and say, all right, I need a lot of new voters to show up so that I could beat Ted Cruz. That's what Donald Trump would need. The lower the turnout, the better it would be for Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz tends to have the conservative stalwarts who are always going to turn out to vote.
Fair to say, though, that when you talk about this, and you're right, Donald Trump always needs to bring out new voters, but every place he's gone, that is the case. He grabs them every time simply because his message, whether it's populist, whether it's real, whether it's something that just people want to hear, he gets them every single time, yes?
He does. He's had tremendous success in getting these new voters to show up, getting them to register Republican. He's really done a great job at getting them there. People who've never before been excited about the political process. You know, we saw this before. If we think back to the Barack Obama elections, Barack Obama did the same thing. That was part of his winning coalition. People who never before voted. So that is one way that polls sometimes cannot measure the entire electorate sometimes, because you do have new voters that have never voted before. You don't know how to really measure them because they have never voted. And then all of a sudden they show up and they're there for Donald Trump or Barack Obama 4 and 8 years ago.
Brian, where do you see the undecided voters going in Texas?
The undecided voters usually go with the person who they are not as familiar with. They're undecided because they're very familiar with Donald Trump. They're undecided because they're very familiar with Ted Cruz, in Texas, that is. And so they most likely, I would say, go with Marco Rubio because he is kind of the fresh face for them.
Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Ben Carson, because we went back and looked at the likely Republican primary voters in Texas. We went back and looked at some of the numbers beforehand, years ago. It seems like years ago at this point right now. October 23rd to the 24th in Dixie Strategies polls, you had Dr. Carson at 22.93%. That's an amazing number. He actually led Donald Trump at that point. Now he's down to 5.79%. Why the precipitous drop? What happened?
Well, as you've seen throughout this campaign, almost every candidate in the Republican field has been at the top of the field at one point or another. And back in October, at that point, Ben Carson was at the top of the field in Texas and nationwide. So what's happened with Dr. Carson is he has faded. He faded behind largely in part because of the debates. Dr. Carson failed to ever find a way to make himself relevant in the debates. And although sometimes he was entertaining, he was just never truly relevant in the debates. And I think that's really affected him. People were looking for someone who was tough, who was different, who really stood out, and he failed to do that.
About a minute left here. Ted Cruz and a super PAC backing him. Nearly $2.5 million in advertising spending in 8 states heading into Super Tuesday. But at this point, $2.5 million, I get it. It's out there. You want to push your message forward. But is there any evidence that if you do this sort of push just before the day, that it makes a difference and changes people's minds?
It does help. It helps to solidify your base, and it helps to make sure you don't lose momentum. But on the other foot here, Marco Rubio is spending over $6 million. His PAC is. So Marco Rubio is spending 3 times as much money as Ted Cruz is right now in those early states. And as you've seen, Marco Rubio is really the one with momentum right now.
I think what you're saying, though, is true. It's not so much about trying to get people to come over to you, but in this sort of an election cycle that we've seen, it's to make sure you don't lose anybody. That's a great point. Brian Graham, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Now, one POTUS candidate believes when it comes to American involvement in various overseas battles, judgment is more important than experience. Is he correct? We'll talk about that next, but want to remind you as well that coming up Super Tuesday, we got it covered right here at Newsmax. Join us beginning with the Hardline, 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night, and we'll bring you all the results from every state right here.